and the film, and now the graphic novel, the story has taken its own sort of life. And that's not because of me, that's because of you. That's because of the readers who are, engaging with this story. And I have to say that a book, we need to remember, is different. It's a creative partnership. In a movie or a TV show, they show us the characters, they show us the setting. But with a book, the author provides the text, but you, the reader, you are the ones who create the characters and who amplify the emotion, and you create the setting. And I just am so honored and privileged to be in a situation to work with, young readers. And I have to also say that the book in many countries is only read by adults. In some countries, they felt it was too dark and too sad, and the history was too sad, and they didn't want to give it to students. So it's always a pleasure for me to chat with young people because you're the ones who are going to carry our history forward into the future. So I can chat forever, but I want to answer your questions. I am here to speak with you, not at you. So if anyone has questions, Laura, how would you like this to?
No, first of all, I have to make an official announcement. Yes, officially, I would like to invite you to Sicily, to Palermo, and I'm sure the consul Palmigiano will be with me to invite you. Really, we will wait for you when pandemic stops.
Great to
So
meet.
you are officially invited on behalf of Liceo Galilei to Palermo.
Of course, it will be really a big pleasure. I'm Alessandro Palmigiano, the Honorary Consul of Lithuania. Thanks a lot to be here and to share with the students your experience. I think that is already connected the ambassador of Lithuania in Italy. So
yeah, I'm here. Hello to everyone.
Oh, hi, excellent.
Hello. So good to see you.
Fine, it's been a while. It has been already a while after our last meeting in Rome, 2018, most probably.
Yep, it was, and that was a wonderful time.
Exactly years ago. My God.
But here we are with 90 people, gathered together. And I love this because I always say that books not only create a reading community, but a human community striving to learn from the past. And that's what we're doing here today on this. So I just love it. And thank you for your invitation. I would love to come to Sicily. Absolutely. That would be a joy and a privilege. And things are moving much more quickly here now. Everyone's really hopeful, and even in Tennessee,
cross fingers.
I know, right? That that we will move forward quickly. So yeah.
Rūta, I had fantastic moment. One of the best memories I have in Italy. It was my visit to this liceo. It was, I believe, autumn 2017. I went to Galileo Lyceum. It was by accident, actually. Alessandro organized everything, and I met so bright young people. Believe me, ragazzi, siete fantastici. Really,
thank you.
really, they are ingenious friends of Lithuania. Every one of them, they have friends in Lithuania. They know our history from the stories of their friends' families. And that makes our life today easier. They really know what we are going to talk about. And they read already the book. But generally, the main point is they're very, very bright and smart young people. Future belongs to them, definitely.
Wow. That's fantastic. And as I said, I'm so honored to be with you because although my books are read, by adults and people even in their 80s and 90s, I write these books for students. So to be able to be on this call today with you I'm so grateful to everyone who has worked so hard to coordinate this. The logistics of having everyone from all these different places together, it's incredible. And definitely one of the benefits of, I guess, virtual, the pandemic, virtual meetings, So I did want to tell some of the students a bit about, my background, because I had a very non-traditional road to becoming a novelist. I wanted to be a writer when I was 9 years old, and I wrote my first book in school. And the book was successful amongst my friends, but some of the friends' parents read the book and said, "What is wrong with this child? This book is completely inappropriate." And the parents really objected to the book, my first novel, and it stole my courage. And I didn't have the courage to write again for over 20 years. So instead, I went into the music business. And, a song is a 3-minute story. And for 22 years, I worked in the music business with songwriters and rock bands and film composers and video game developers. And we were telling stories, but through different mediums. And I was always asking people, so what's your story? What's your story? Because I found that when we include an element of our own personal history in our work, it carries an authenticity. It carries a resonance that just feels more authentic. And one day, one of these musicians, they said, "Okay, Rūta, you've been asking us, what's the story?" And they said, "We want to know, what's your story?" And I said, "Oh, my story. I'm Rūta Šepetys. I'm Lithuanian." And the lead singer of the band said, "Oh, I'm very sorry. How long have you had that, Lithuanian?" I said, "No, Lithuania is a country." And this musician said that, when he was in school, he said, "I don't think I saw Lithuania on a map." And to his point, as you know, for so many years, Lithuania wasn't on a map. And these musicians, they had no idea about the history of Lithuania or the Baltics or Soviet occupation. And so they tasked me. They said, "Okay, we need to know about your story. And you are the one who needs to tell this story." And so that was kind of the spark that started me, that inspired me to write this book. And the idea came quickly. One girl, her dream of freedom, and a voice to speak for so many people of the Baltics who never had a chance to tell their story. And that became this book, Between Shades of Gray. And I never imagined that after the book was published, that my publisher would come to me and say, "This music business stuff, working on American Idol and these TV shows, we don't want you to do it anymore. We want you to write full time." And I tell you this story because, we take many roads to get to a destination in life. Many roads. It's a journey. And mine certainly was, and yours will be too. Maybe some of you are interested in writing or music, and you can do all of it. So I think some of you have questions or prepared questions. Like I said, I can chat, but I would love to hear from you directly.
If, I don't know, Dr. Palmigiano, would you like to say something before we start with questions? I don't know.
Yes. I want really to thank Rūta. I want to thank the school. It's really important for us that you will join this meeting, and the connection between Lithuanian community and your school, it's really becoming stronger and stronger, and I'm really happy about that. I want also to thank His Excellency to be here to join and to stay with us, and also, of course, I want to thank all the students that had the time to read the book. I remember it was the first book that I read about Lithuania, because when I was young, there was not so much news about Lithuania. When I studied story, we just studied the Soviet Union, so we didn't know so much about the history of Lithuania. So this book, it's important because let the young generation of the Western world to know more about the history and about the tragedy of Lithuania. So really, thank you. Then the book, it's really strong. It's amazing, really. Thanks.
Thank you so much for those kind words. I appreciate it.
Okay, Luigi, let's start with little surprise.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'd like to greet everyone. First of all, Rūta, labas rytas, Rūta. Aš norėčiau padėkoti Jums už duotą galimybę man ir mano klasiokams turėti su Jumis interview. I take great pride in welcoming all the other attendees of this meeting, the ambassador, the honorary consul for the region of Sicily, and of course all the professors and schoolmates who are here. Ours is a school that has been inextricably linked to Vilnius for years. Every year, our students are engaged in cultural exchange programs with the Lyceum of Užupis. And throughout the years, friendships and relationships have been blossoming, binding our two cities from one end to the other of Europe. We have had the opportunity to intimately discover the depth and the sensitivity of a uniquely fascinating people, the diversity that separates us and unites us at the same time as European brothers and sisters. Together with our Lithuanian partners, we visited the Museum of Occupation and Freedom Fights in the center of Vilnius. We cannot forget the sense of nausea, the shivering and discomfort we felt while visiting Lithuanian partisans' jails. Pain, anger, and impotence devour the mind when we learn of an injustice of such magnitude, which one would like to remedy, even though they're not guilty, even though they're far away in time and space. Feelings that inevitably came back to us reading the story of Lina and her family. Feelings that you never get used to, even if we Italians know them well, because they are the ones we feel when thinking about the cruelties of Nazi fascism. Feelings that must inevitably be channeled and transformed into a sense of responsibility, of testimony to safeguard peace and rights. The title of your book in Italian is They Turned Off the Moon. This title perfectly epitomizes the atmosphere of total darkness that reigned in Europe at that time. Darkness that we have defeated with the light of democracy, human rights, and culture. We believe that the goal of our school and of many schools around the world is to amplify the light, to be beacons of awareness. Jūsų knyga padidį šviesos ryškumą, kurią kiekvienas iš mūsų perduos ateities kartoms. Ačiū.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Thank you. That is so beautiful. Obviously, you are a writer, well on your way, and I do hope you pursue it. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And I'm so moved by the interest that you have in Lithuania and Lithuanian culture. And I'm hoping that I can connect you with some other schools around the world. Next week, I'm meeting with a school in South Africa who also is doing something similar. And I think we have a chance, to connect some of these schools together and really build this beautiful bridge. And as you were speaking, that's what I was thinking of. Thank you.
Now, actually, I also like to ask the first question, which is actually quite broad and a bit, historical. Many make fun here in Italy and in Western Europe about Siberia with a nonchalance that they certainly would not have when talking about Auschwitz, often because perhaps they do not know or ignore what happened in the Soviet Union. In your opinion, first of all, why is the story of the Baltic genocide so little known in the West? And reading your book, studying history, but also reading newspapers that talk about what is happening in China to the Uyghurs, a question that spontaneously arises is, does communism as an ideology, in your opinion, intrinsically carry the seeds of violent totalitarianism, and that cruelty you narrate in your book?
I'll start with the last question first about communism. And during my studies, I have found that communism has many faces. And the communism that affected the Baltics, let's say, is different than the communism that, let's say, Nicolae Ceausescu oversaw in the country of Romania, and is different than the forms of communism in China. But historically, when we study communism, the one thing we see in common is that it is a system that doesn't work, and it is the human beings who pay the price of these systems. And so I think that it's important to study each application of communist ideology separately. And there are, for context and historically, because things are thrown around, especially here in the United States. If you hear people here in the United States, some say socialist, people will say, oh, that's communist. They lump them all together, and these need to be studied separately. And then that goes to your first question, and you're exactly right. Comments about Siberia, in some aspects, were used almost as a joke, that people would say, oh, well, she's off in Siberia somewhere, or it was this reference of something very far away, but without the context, people were using it, completely inappropriately, to your point. And the same goes for Lithuania. I think many Lithuanians on this chat right now can think of times in, whether it was movies or television shows, that Lithuania was used in a similar reference. I remember watching a comedy movie, and they used Lithuania like a punchline. They said, oh, well, yeah, he's got a new girlfriend. She's from Lithuania. And then there was sort of this audience laughter, because it was so remote and something that was so distant, so foreign, so unknown, that it was almost used as a joke. And through books and films and television shows, we have an opportunity to give context to these parts of history that are underrepresented, and the people who experience that history. Because let's remember that when history remains hidden in the shadows, the human beings who experience that history, they feel that the world has forgotten them. And that's not the case. We just don't know their story. I'm so impressed that you even bring up the Uyghurs. I think there are so many people who would have no context even for what that means, especially related to communism. So why do we not know more about it? I will say, and I really hope that Mr. Ambassador will chime in as well on this, that after World War II, at the post-war conferences of Yalta and Potsdam, that was a crossroad. And at those conferences, the Baltics were put under Soviet control. And when I travel around the world, some people refer to that as the Great Betrayal, that at that point, that's when these three countries officially disappeared from maps. Mr. Ambassador, what would you say about that? Do you agree that also contributed once these were formally put into the Soviet Union for 50 years, that when we disappeared from a map, that so did perhaps some of the identification of these countries?
Yeah, of course, we disappeared for 50 years, and no, it's difficult to accuse someone, who did not take any measures to present us, to fight for us. Now we are absolutely in different position talking about those times. But one of the reasons, but we are newcomers for many people. In fact, our stories as a country starts 1253. And that is, especially for Lithuania, a huge contradiction. When someone says, "Oh, you are a young country," sorry, almost 800 years. With Roman Empire, yes, we are a young one, anti-Roma, but when we compare with another European nations, we are quite old. But our history is quite dramatic and traumatic, I would say. And that we have consequences of this history. But key point, also talking about communism, I think the problem is it's not fair to compare communism and Nazis. There are different ideologies, different measures. Of course, you are right, Rūta, saying that always people pay the price. But what is the problem is this communism in general, but the communists didn't have its own Nuremberg process. It somehow, it crime, but maybe not crime, no one responsible, for that. And that is somehow still we left it to historians, to artists. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's, again, less traumatic for people. But look, couple thoughts. This year, 14th of January, Lithuania will commemorate 80 years of beginning of mass deportations. It was 1941, 14th June, when deportation started. Can you imagine that in 3 days, about 17,000 people from Lithuania were deported to Siberia? And it is exactly this period about Rūta writes about in her book. It was very, very, very painful deportations, because among a lot of people were deported to Arctic zone, and they were just sent to death. The largest deportations from Lithuania took place in May 1948. Imagine, 5 days, 40,000 people deported. 40,000 in 5 days. Can you imagine? What does it mean? Altogether, it's up to 100,000 Lithuanians were deported to Siberia. As Rūta said, that in Lithuania, every family has someone who was deported. I called before meeting, just exactly 45 minutes ago, I called my aunt to Kauno. Asked, look, tell me a story very quickly. My aunt was deported to Siberia 1949. She was 10. She returned to Lithuania 1961. She was 22. She spent 12 years in Siberia. Her parents returned even later, 1965. They spent 16 years in Siberia. Her parents couldn't come back to Lithuania together with her because their house they used to live was destroyed. They had nowhere to come back. She returned alone. She got some small apartment, and that was conditioned for her parents to come back. That is classical story, typical story of deportees. A lot of people are not allowed to come back to Lithuania. They were forced to live somewhere in Latvia, in Russia, or stayed in Siberia. We are talking about broken lives. But why it was done? Deportations of 1941, as Rūta writes perfectly. First, people educated. Teachers, doctors, priests, officials. It was the idea to break intellectual backbone of nation. Deportations after the war, especially in 1948, farmers, people who had economic potential. Why? To break backbone of economic potential of nation. It was not that ideology of communists, but it was also actions of foreign force which occupied Lithuania. And yes, that is still not known. But when you talk one is statistics, it's statistics. But when you read the story written by Rūta, you feel individual story. And we have thousands of such individual stories. I stop here. It's not good audience to talk about political matters. We should come back to the novel.
Yeah, well, and I will say also about why do people not know about this? We have to keep in mind that the people who were deported to Siberia and who survived, they didn't speak of it. I met many true witnesses and survivors who were even hesitant to speak with me. And this was when I was researching the book in 2005, 2006, 15 years ago. It was as if Stalin hung over them like a cold shadow. KGB, this threat was ever present. And there was fear that if they did speak about it or speak about the regime in a negative way, that they might be arrested and deported again. So the story went silent. It went dormant. And there are so many aspects of Lithuanian history and other countries' history that also have fallen dormant. So I think, to answer your question, it's a combination of those things.
Clara, next question.
Yeah, first of all, wow, thank you. It's such a great opportunity for us to have you here. It's wonderful to see so many faces today. Now, my question is, in your novel, we can see many female figures. One of the most prominent is the main character's mother. What mostly caught my attention about this character was her generosity, her nobility of spirit, and her politeness, especially towards the enemy, even though Russians, we all know, harassed her and her children many times. Is there a moral behind this noble attitude? Is there a message you want to send us? Maybe a message to make us behave in such a way? Finally, as we've already said, your novel is studded with female figures. Why did you decide to do so?
Thank you for that important question, because it allows me also to speak about the incredible spirit and strength of Lithuanian women, which I've experienced in my own family, my grandmother, my aunt, and so in building the character of the mother, I took threads from interviews, so many women that I had interviewed, women that I knew, Lithuanian women, and I wove them together to create a composite character. Why did I do that? Because I felt that in weaving together elements of many women, I was representing a greater experience, Lithuanian female experience, into this one character. So it's not based on one person, but is a composite. And in terms of a message, I actually try very hard not to push a message or at a reader. Sometimes because I think it's obvious, and that's, when you feel like someone's saying, I'm going to teach you something now. But more importantly, because history is full of universal themes of hope over hardship and strength over struggle. And those themes naturally rise to the surface. And what some of the things that came through so clearly that I wanted to personify through this female character, there were Lithuanians who told me that their suffering was their greatest spiritual teacher. That being deported, that yes, it was beyond difficult, but they found meaning in their hardship. And so through this mother character, I was hoping to share that in life, we can't choose our hardships, but we can choose how we face our hardships. And the country of Lithuania exemplifies that, how they lived for 50 years under occupation, full of grace and dignity, and held on to their culture and their humanity. So those were things that I was hoping that readers through the mother character might realize. But also, I did meet Lithuanians who, when I interviewed them, I asked about, you talked about this dynamic with the Soviets, and I asked about their feelings and if they harbored resentment, or if there was hatred and things. And these people, they laughed at me and they said, Rūta, you are so silly. They said, if we harbored resentment or anger or aggression toward these people, we're perpetuating the same cycle and we've learned nothing. And they said, in many cases, imagine a Soviet guard who's sent to the Laptev Sea. That's a bad job. I mean, that guard is a prisoner himself. And so to really think critically, what these Lithuanians were telling me is that there were things to be experienced together. And we often paint, in black or white, they're good or bad. But they said no, that it was only when we peeled back the layers of gray that that's where the truth was. And so I tried to exemplify that through the mother character, her relationship with the Soviet Guard, and some of the, the Lithuanians in general.
Thank you.
There's another question, this time Martina.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here with us today. My question is about the theme of drawing in the book. One of the things that I really appreciated about this book is how you describe with this topic the tragedy of Gulag's life that marked the development of the protagonist Lina. Actually, I discovered that you can't draw, so I was wondering why you added this topic and why this is so important in the book. Thank you.
Thank you, because this is a very important question. And also, thank you for your research. You're right. I cannot draw at all, at all. However, my father, who fled from Lithuania as a small boy and spent 9 years in DP camps, he can draw. My aunt, Rūta, she can draw. My Aunt Lena, my father's aunt, she can draw. And what I learned, and this goes back to the very first question about how come, why don't people know about this? That imagine, here are Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians. They've lost their family. They've lost, in some cases, their language. They've lost the name of their country's taken off the map. They've, but they couldn't take their spirit. And these people found ways to communicate and to raise their words if they even couldn't use their voice. And they did it through art and music and dance. These were all forms of expression. And in my research, I learned Lithuanians told me that in some cases, they were even creating songs and singing songs that were embedded with information. And think about it, melody and rhythm is very powerful. We might not remember one sentence that one of us says today, but tonight we might hear a song that we haven't heard in 5 years, and we can sing every word to that song because melody and rhythm are so powerful. So the Lithuanians started, and Estonians and Latvians created songs, and they were with, short little melodies, and those songs were carrying information, and those melodies were traveling to different camps, and people were learning. Same with drawings. In Latvia, in the Museum of Occupation, there are so many beautiful drawings that people created in an effort to share this history and share this story. And those time capsules are so incredible. And so those forms of expression, I wanted to include that in the book. And sometimes people say, "Oh, Lithuanians, yeah, Lithuanians, they're such good dancers," or they're good wood carvers, or they're good artists. That's not a coincidence, when you find a way to speak, even if your voice has been extinguished. And that's why I included it in the novel. And I will have to say that when we were creating the film, it was difficult to represent that in the film, because what I found is that as all of you are reading the book, you're each having a different, you're envisioning something completely different, because a book belongs to the reader. And what's important is the reader's interpretation. So as you're imagining Lina drawing, you're imagining one thing, but maybe I'm imagining another. And when we went to create the film, I was flooded with emails from readers saying, "No, that's not what her drawings look like." And it's really very interesting. And so that has also given me a lot of opportunity to work with art schools in countries all over the world, where the students interpret and they create their own art in universities and art schools and high schools, even in middle schools. So that's been a really beautiful exchange as well.
All right, ready for the next question?
Okay.
Here we are. This time by Luigi.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Yes, first of all, I just want to say how happy I am, and it is a pleasure for me to be here with you and with all of these people from all over the world. So I'm going to read my question because it's a little bit longer than the others. Even if we have directly seen Lina's father only once, he was mentioned countless times through the whole narration. The chance of him being still alive is the reason why Lena's family kept going without giving up, even during their worst experiences. Moreover, Lena's intention to report everything through her diary and her art is strictly connected to her father's figure too. Is it possible to consider him as one of the main characters despite his absence?
I love this question. Yes, absolutely. Even though someone is perceived gone, they are not forgotten, and they can still play a role. And I found this in interviewing people from Lithuania, that many of them, what kept their hope alive was just the thought, the possibility that they might be able to reunite with someone. There was one example. There was a woman who told me she was 15 years old when she was deported, and at the train station she met a boy who was from a different school. And while the train was there during that day, they sort of connected and they met, and that boy, the thought of that connection kept her alive for years. And so, yes, even if someone isn't physically in front of us, they can play such a role in hope and energizing the miraculous nature of the human spirit, to keep hope alive. So yes, and I have to tell you, because it's just 100 of us, I can tell you a secret story that when you write a book, you obviously have editors and publishers, and they all have their opinion on what should happen with the fate of these characters. And in the first draft of the book, it was very clear that the father did not survive. It was very clear. There was no chance he wasn't alive. But as my publishers in New York read the drafts and spoke to me about my research, they were adamant. They said, "No, you told us of these people who were separated for 15 years, but then they reunited. You can't just kill the father like that. Absolutely not. Because who knows, that mystery, you need to keep that there." And they really wanted me to include that element of hope and not give a definitive answer as to whether the father is alive. And when I do school visits, I'll often ask students, a show of hands, like, how many of you think he survived and how many of you think he didn't? And it's often quite even. But yes, I absolutely think a character can be a main character if they're not present. I even think that a character can be a main character if they're no longer living. I mean, I think everyone on this call, knows someone, has lost someone, and they're still very present in our heart, and their memory is alive. So yeah.
Thank you, really, thank you.
Thank you.
Carlotta, it's your turn.
Yes.
Carlotta is one of the representatives of the students as well as Luigi. So
yes. It's an honor for me to join this online meeting with you. Your book really changed my perspective and taught me a lot of things. So really, thank you. My question is, something that I noticed was the theme of silence. I often read phrases of the book that often said, "Do not talk, do not show your drawings, you have to suffer in silence." This really hit me. What's the importance of this theme in your book?
What I'm asking through this theme of silence, does silence truly heal pain, or does sometimes it just prolong it? And what is the cost of silence? And all of your questions thread so beautifully together. I can go back to the very first question. Why is it that we don't know more about this history? Or why isn't it as part of our collective consciousness like other parts of history? When we don't know one another's story, we are constantly misjudging each other. And what I've found through my research is that sometimes if we don't know someone's story, we tend to fill in the blanks ourselves, and we create a false narrative. And I think all of us know what it's like to feel misunderstood. It feels terrible. And silence creates this potential for misunderstanding. I'll just even give you an example from my own family. My father is in his 80s and was living in a nearby neighborhood, and there was sort of this rumor. My dad had this reputation that he was unpatriotic, which my father is so grateful for the life that the United States has given to him and the education and everything. He is very, very patriotic. But the reason they said that is because on 4th of July here, we have all these firework displays and it's pretty bombastic. And my dad doesn't go to those. And so because the neighbors didn't know why, they said, well, George is unpatriotic. He's unpatriotic. And I said, Dad, tell them your story. And he said, no one will care. Well, one day a boy came by on his bike and he said, Mr. Šepetys, are you unpatriotic? And my dad said, no. He said, when I was your age, there was a war going on and I was in a refugee camp that was near a military base and it was bombed constantly. And he said, on the 4th of July, when those fireworks and concussion bombs go off, he said, it triggers something in me and it makes me feel like I'm that little boy. And it's a bit traumatic. And he said, and instead of making other people uncomfortable and say, what's wrong with George? He said, I just tend to avoid it. He said, so that's why I don't go. And he said, does that make sense? And the little boy shook his head and he pedaled off on his bike. And my dad heard him say to his friends, you guys, Mr. George was bombed. And the kids told the story to their parents, and the parents told other parents. And once they knew my father's story, the atmosphere went from one of criticism to compassion. All of a sudden, it wasn't that my father was unpatriotic. He was a survivor of World War II, and he had lost his country. And where was the country? And then they were looking on a map. Where is Lithuania? So silence. If we And mind you, sometimes silence is absolutely necessary, and I understand that. But if we don't know one another's story, and if we don't know one another's history, we are missing the opportunity for progress. We're missing the opportunity to better understand our fellow man and move forward into the future. So it is absolutely a theme, and I'm so glad you picked up on that. Thank you.
If I may, I would like to add just from one of the deepest pains I have in my heart. I couldn't have chance to talk to my granddad sincerely. He died 1 year before restoration of our independence. In Soviet time, no one would dare to tell real stories. If he would have lived 2-3 years longer, I would learn from him much more. That is, we are a country of untold stories. People wanted to somehow not to forget, but to block the pain, not to share the pain, not to pass the pain to kids, to grandchildren, and to take them to their tombs. No, we are a country of untold. Now people can speak freely, but those who can tell stories, we have less and less every day. And my experience is that I missed this chance. I was too young, and he died. He was just 70 years old, and just exactly 1 year before our independence. I think if he would have lived a bit longer, he would share with me his story.
I have a similar situation. My grandfather died 1 year before Lithuania achieved their independence. I was too young. I was a little girl. I wasn't perhaps interested at that point, in chatting. And it does break my heart that now, that untold story is even in my own family. My father didn't know the story. And when people ask me, they say, oh, well, would you ever write books that are set, let's say, in 1600s, 1700s? Yes, I'm interested in all forms of history. But to the ambassador's point, we have an opportunity now, while the true witnesses are still with us, to help share their stories. And historical fiction, again, my book is fiction, it sits on the shoulders of memoir, of testimony, of nonfiction. And there are so many incredible testimonies out there by the true witnesses that now one of my initiatives is getting grants to translate some of these memoirs and into multiple languages so they can be shared more widely. Because that's, to me, what's important, is that someone reads the book and they say, okay, what's the real story? And who is the true witness? And where can I find them? And to search those primary sources, as we call them.
Okay, let's now give the word to Andrea, who's gonna ask you another question. Andrea.
Thank you. So I have to say that I really enjoyed your book, and now I noticed that dehumanizing prisoners has been done since the dawn of human civilization, especially after conflicts and exterminations. So I'd like to know which forms of dehumanization should we fight in our contemporary world to avoid the repetition of the catastrophic persecution made by the Soviets or the Nazis.
Oh, that is such a relevant topic right now, dehumanization. And what should we fight is your question. I think we should take great care to be perceptive about when someone might be othered, this term that we use here in the United States. When someone is othering, when we are separating someone, the illusion of separation is so damaging. And many of these leaders, they were very familiar with this. And so one of their first goals was, as Mr. Ambassador said, to sort of break the back of certain elements of a society, but then to isolate. And so we have othering, and then we have, isolation, because when we feel separate, we sometimes tend to feel that our opinion doesn't matter. We feel left behind. So if we can look today and see how we might be othering someone, and how we might be othering certain groups, and take steps. And I say this with full knowledge that this is difficult, and progress isn't permanent. But because all of you are such beautiful ambassadors for humanity and so beautiful, intelligent and wise, moving forward, this will be up to you. You will be a better generation than we are in terms of dehumanization and othering, to really try to be as inclusive. And how do we do that? We use the greatest gift that we have as human beings, which is empathy, to look through someone else's eyes and consider their heart. And so in a moment when we're hearing about something or a news story or a group, if we can pause and be present and say, wait, I'm going to look through their eyes and consider their heart. And what is the wise thing to do? That question sort of answers everything. If I have what is the wise thing to do? Considering our past experience and our hopes and dreams for the future, what is the wise thing to do? And we cannot separate. We are so much stronger when we are united. Perhaps you are sitting, watching what's been going on in the United States and seeing how being divided has really had a terrible effect on our history. So that's what we can do, this dehumanization, to try to be very alert when we see othering going on. And I absolutely have to be accountable, because I'm part of this generation that isn't used to doing this and being accountable for our thoughts. And I grew up with all of these different segmentations and groups and defining people and putting them in boxes. But like I say, progress isn't permanent. We've made progress, but we have so much work left to do. And I really feel thrilled to be alive during this very transformative time.
Okay, and there are a couple of questions now, and one is by Luigi.
Yes, it's me again. I was wondering, the titles. What does it mean for you? Because I didn't quite understand it.
Yep. And also, you may wonder, do authors title their own books? Sometimes is the answer. Our publishers are very involved with the title of the book. There are these huge marketing departments and sales departments who are doing research and looking at what's popular, and they're trying, they're interested in selling the book. So an author might come up with a title and something that might be poetic or personal or important, and the publisher might say, no, it doesn't have appeal, and they're going to want to change it. And I made the mistake, Luigi, of thinking that whatever the title was in the United States would be the title throughout the rest of the world. And that is so not the case at all. I'll show you, for example.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. For example, our Italian title is totally different from the translation of yours.
Exactly. And let's also talk about translation then. I am so grateful to my translators. I say, oh, these books are published in 60 countries. That's not my achievement. I could never do that without the translator. And imagine the gift that someone is giving by translating these books and these pieces of history. But yes, the translator does have an involvement. And my Italian publisher is Garzanti, and they wanted something that might be more poetic. They even turned off the moon. They took everything from us, and they even turned off the moon. But when they came to me with that title and said, what do you think? I really liked it. And what I've learned is that an author writes a book, and you think you know what your book is about because you've written it. But when others read it, they might interpret it differently. In France, they titled, What Cannot Be Taken From Me. The book has themes of more of identity than silence. And so I think a title is important. And what I tell myself is that it represents, hopefully, the reader and the publisher who's publishing it as well. So, but with my title, Between Shades of Gray, as I explained that, we tend to categorize things too quickly in black and white. And when I approached this topic, I noticed that my mindset was, oh, well, the Soviets they were very bad, and the Lithuanians were very good, and, so overly simplistic. But when I got into the history, it's much more nuanced than that. And history has many angles. It's not black or white. It's only when we peel back those layers and we get to the gray that maybe we'll have an opportunity to grasp and understand the truth. And that's why I called it Between Shades of Gray. In Lithuania, it's called Between Gray Clouds. Every country's a little bit different. And I was showing that even the Dutch edition is called Shadow Love. I mean, totally different title, Shadow Love. So, titles can be interpreted in so many ways.
Actually, we loved the Italian one. We loved it so much. Okay, we have 2 more questions. I'd like to say that we would go on and on and on. I mean, that's because, of shortage of time, but we would go on. Anyway, next question is by Martina. And then, of course, also our colleague, Anna Maria, if you would like to say something, please tell me.
Okay, my question is about the love story between Lena and Andrews. I really appreciated their love story because they, in a sense, in their simplicity, especially because their love story would have seemed in other contexts almost banal. So their love story gave to the story a message of love and of hope in such an atmosphere of hate. I was wondering if the narrative choice of the young love story placed side by side to the Gulag's tragedy was crucial to interest more the young public.
It's something I think that is often assumed, that to interest a young reader that, you need a love story. But I find that that's not actually the case, that young readers are deep thinkers and deep feelers, and a sense of injustice will touch a young reader just as much as a love story. And what I've found when people say, oh, well, do you feel obligated to put hope into these books or a love story? What I've found is that I don't have to feel obligated at all, because history, as I said, is full of these universal themes. And while you do have horror, that juxtaposition is hope. And horror and hope, are always present. And the same with loss and love, that if we feel a sense of loss, the only reason we feel that loss is because we have the capacity to love. And so these things go hand in hand. They go side by side. And in history, I have found, as I'm researching these periods of adversity, that people were forming everlasting bonds through shared experience. And perhaps, in stories, when you read of stories of the concentration camps, and you also find these bonds that through shared experience, people were coming together, and people who never would have come together otherwise. And so I think that is one of the universal themes of history. So it's there. And do I choose to include it? I do, but not as a marketing ploy. No, not to gain an audience. I choose to include it because to me, it seems like a universal truth.